The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. Today we continue our conversation answering listener emails as it relates to the recent EU elections and the increase in the number of far-right politicians that have gained seats in the European Parliament. And our question this week comes from Robert from Sydney, Australia, who asked, why do you think the world politics is shifting to the far right? And can this be stopped, or is the world about to become more isolated? So, those are his questions. Let's listen in. All right.
We've got a wonderful question.
We actually do. This is not from the feed bag. It is from the mailbag.
Well, I like to call it feedback. I can't help it.
I understand. So this past, and again, this is I condensed it down out of 4 different emails that were basically asking the same thing. So I just condensed it.
Wait, but before we go forward with this, can you how many people send us mail?
Oh gosh,
we get a lot.
Yeah, we do.
And you guys share my hate mail with me. I want to hear that.
We don't get very much hate mail. But no, Scott, we don't get very much hate mail. We probably get around about 200 emails a week.
Get out of here. Really?
200, yeah.
200? Wow.
Well, at least we're not getting 200 emails a day.
No. A lot of it depends on what we're talking. I would say the average is 200. Some of the topics, back on May 6th, we did an Israeli question about American policy in the region. It was hugely popular, and we got 600 emails that week.
Holy cow.
Yep.
Are these like, yeah, right on, or are they like, you guys don't know what you're talking about?
Well, there's a little mix of the both. So listen, right now we have 17,204 contacts.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah.
Very good.
All right. So
yeah, I saw there are a bunch of people who are interested in the European.
Very many people. So this past week in Europe, this is a combination of the emails that we received, paraphrased, of course. This past week in Europe, far-right political parties won many seats in the European Parliament. Far-right parties in Germany and France gained more seats in those countries than ever before. France's president has called for new elections, which the news, and I'm assuming the news agencies, say the current president might actually lose. Now, of course, keeping in mind that he's calling for new elections, but that's not for the president. That's actually for the lower house of government in France. Next, I think the next logical one here of the group would be Robert from Sydney, Australia, because we've been talking about this quite a bit. Why do you think the world politics is shifting to the far right? And can this be stopped, or is the world about to become more isolated? And I believe he meant more isolationist.
Yeah, it's, well, if that should happen, that's going to be deeply unfortunate. I mean, Mark, when you said German world, Deutsche Welle, did you mean Deutsche Welle that you had watched the program?
It's DW.
Yeah, that's Deutsche Welle. It's
okay.
German wave. Yeah, you and I watched the same program because.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Guys should get popcorn.
Huh?
Yeah, the program. That's why I saw, because I saw you nodding when I was talking about the transfer payments to Italy from elsewhere in I believe it was Northern Europe. A major issue is the need for global trade. And isolationism, one point that the DW, and I do recommend DW as well, it's Deutsche Welle or it's German Wave. You can find this on YouTube. The economists, and I mean, clearly the world is set up for global trade. And by isolating itself, Europe will be doing itself an enormous disservice. The individual, and I don't remember his name, his point, who was being interviewed on the program, made the point that Europe needs more trading partners, not fewer. They don't need protectionism. They need to develop more trading relationships. They need freer trade. They like the North American Free Trade Agreement, for instance, and I don't even know if that's still extant after Trump, to be honest. I mean, and this is part of the problem. There are so many issues from so many areas that a person cannot keep up with everything or even be aware of everything. But Europe needs to establish and maintain open trade. And if Europe closes itself off, and if it be from the world and closes itself off again by closing its borders, it would be very much like having provinces in Canada or states in the United States deciding that they're not going to trade freely across state borders or provincial borders. Now, then one has lost freedom of movement of people and goods and services. To do something like that, I think, is highly foolish. I mean, immediately a person can see difficulties with tariffs, and that, of course, becomes the end of the euro. And if you look at Brexit, people who voted for Brexit, which I thought was a really stupid idea at the time, people were not thinking about what was going to happen afterward. Oh, we want to be independent. Okay, fine. But you're talking about now going back to the British pound. You're getting rid of the euro. Now you're talking about having to convert your currency. Now you're talking about re-erecting international borders. Now you're talking about, all kinds of barriers rather than eliminating those obstacles. Though they're being raised. And like it or not, the world is flat, as I believe Thomas Friedman said. I mean, it's not literally flat. It's, sorry to the Flat Earth Society, the world is not physically flat. But as far as trade is concerned, with the capacity that we have for travel and exchanges of goods and services and people moving around the world as tourists and so forth, to close themselves off, it's a really stupid idea.
And the person that was being interviewed was Clemens Faust. He is from the Info Institute, which is a think tank that actually looks at economics. And he was saying that isolationism for Europe is really not an option. Europe does not have the resources necessary. They do an awful lot of trade, and that a far right, more isolationist type of government in the EU would be disastrous for the European economy. United States, maybe not so much, because there are a lot of things that we can produce here ourselves. We can be relatively self-sufficient.
Well, I was just thinking when you said resource scarce. This is why Britain became an imperialist nation, because they ran out of their own resources. So they had to strip other nations for firewood, for other things, because they had nothing themselves. So for Europe not to learn the lesson, I mean, it just boggles my mind. Is this guy a macroeconomist? Does it say?
No, it doesn't say.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. I just want to make that point.
We have to remember Europe is not self-sufficient. If it was, Germany wouldn't have had to get gas from Russia. Sorry.
Or create synthetics when after that. So yeah, I mean I don't think that they're thinking.
No.
Their emotional response. Oh, we have to. No, that's not reality. I don't understand this. I genuinely don't.
So, I mean, that goes back to the question from Robert and from Sydney. Why do we think the world politics is shifting to the far right, even here in the United States? Why is this? And are we moving toward a more isolationist world? Scott?
Ooh. So, yeah, I mean, look, it's all about immigration, right? And the truth of the matter is that people are on the move. Climate change is driving that. Starvation is driving that. Lack of opportunities are driving that. I think the UN estimate for 2022, which might be the last year that we have it, was that 281 million people were on the move. That's like almost 4% of the world's population was moving from one place to another. And clearly, a lot of them want to come here. And, we do have to control that. But I'll just take this in two parts. For the Europeans, right? And Brooke mentioned Brexit, which was driven by a massive amount of immigration in 2015, which led to the 2016 Brexit, right? They counted irregular entries. That's the term that they use for people coming to their borders or trying to get across their borders. Irregular entries spiked from 107,000 in 2013 to 1.8 million in 2015, mostly from the Middle East, mostly from Syria and Afghanistan. And we bear some of the blame for that. But by 2016, those numbers there and here had dropped to 500,000, less than, 500,000. And yet the right exploited the previous year's spike in immigration to win elections, Brexit being one of them, Trump being another, here in the States. Now, the numbers stayed more or less flat until 2020 when the pandemic happened, and then completely fell off, right? In 2020, there were only 126,000 irregular border crossings. But now those numbers are beginning to creep up as people are looking for economic opportunity, and people are looking for jobs and to get away from places where there's famine and the climate's not cooperating with them anymore. So in 2023, there were 385,000 irregular crossings, right? But most of that came from Ukraine, and it was mostly refugees. And the EU agreed to take them after the war started in 2022. So the legal migration coming into Europe from Eastern Europe spiked to 3.5 million in 2022 just because of Ukraine and the war that Russia put on Ukraine. So I'm not going to get to the States yet, but I'm going to shift to that if you don't mind, because
Absolutely.
For the first time.
May I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Before we get away from Brexit, I was thinking about how long Brexit took to implement, and the deadline was missed and all this stuff. Has that actually been completed at this time? Do you know? Because I don't even know if it was ever actually completed. The withdrawal from the EU and all the finalization, and they missed deadlines for this and that, as I remember.
I have no idea. I haven't heard anything about Brexit for a really long time, whether it's even from whether the standpoint of it's popular or people think it was a mistake. I'm not really sure.
Last I heard, I think a lot of people felt that it had been a mistake. They wished that they hadn't voted for it, which doesn't surprise me. But I don't even know if it was ever fully finalized. They had missed. The last I knew, they had missed deadlines, but this was a couple, years. Like, this was before the pandemic and before. So I don't know what happened with that. But anyway, go ahead. You were talking about Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of people being in your country who are foreign born, right? Has spiked into double digits in a lot of countries, right? In Germany, I think in 1990, 8% of Germany's residents were foreign born, 8%. Now it's 19%. In Spain, 2% in 1990, 15% by 2020. Sweden, 9% in 1990 of went up to 20%, doubled, more than doubled by 2020. And here in the States, during that same time frame, 1990 to 2020, the number of foreign-born people living in the country went from 9% to 15%. That's going to cause a backlash. There's no doubt about it. People are looking around and seeing foreigners living in their country. I mean, I see it all the time. I went to the beach the other day, and the one language I didn't hear spoken was English. It's all Eastern Europeans and Hispanics. So it's very, it can be very unnerving to people to encounter foreign-born people in their country, and gives you the idea that your country is not going to be the same anymore. And that's what's causing this backlash.
The idea of immigration, it's always existed. And yeah, it is an issue. It's an issue that each one of the nation states has to agree to deal with in their own way. And yeah, legal immigration, I don't think anybody really has a problem with that. I think they have a problem with illegal immigration, and it's the influx. Now, the question being, really, when we talk about this, again, are we going to become more isolated? And I, as you were talking, I was thinking, this, if we look at the numbers and we look at how we're shifting more toward the right, and I hate to even bring this up, but we're going to take a shot at it. Is this a backlash from the pandemic? Because it seems to be even more prevalent now that the pandemic is behind us, but it seems to have, I don't know, it seems to have grown during the pandemic years.
First of all, unless I am mistaken, Trump also either stopped or wanted to stop legal immigration as well as illegal immigration. I don't know if he was successful in that, but I thought he had stopped all immigration. I could be incorrect. Or he wanted to halt all immigration. And the second thing is isolation. And now I don't know if isolation, solitary confinement, let's put it that way. Solitary confinement. So for people who were alone in their homes, and I don't know if this would include families who were isolated in their homes as well. Solitary confinement in prison settings, or solitary confinement period, has been proven, and I can provide you with the research articles if you like, to produce paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, and other mental illnesses, including self-harm to extreme self-harm, and becoming a danger to others, including in people who were previously mentally healthy. And of course, if a person was not mentally well prior to being put in a solitary confinement situation, then that would be a lot worse. So whether being isolated with one's family and being unable to leave the environment, I would think that would also have potentially an effect, an alteration, and one might possibly become quite territorial. Mm-hmm. It would maybe have an different effect on different people. I don't know. That's a good question that I don't know if anybody is actually studying that.
Yeah, I definitely think that xenophobia increased during the pandemic. But Mark, you said something about legal and illegal immigration. Nobody should be for illegal immigration, right? So I think, but the fact is that I think those terms get kind of blended together a lot. And that here in the States, we don't, if somebody steps onto U.S. soil, without permission and tries to claim asylum, a lot of people are saying, well, that's illegal immigration, and they call them illegals.
Correct.
The fact is that our law says that you have to step on U.S. soil or go to a consulate or an embassy or something like that in another country which is considered U.S. soil to apply for asylum. We need to change that law. We need to change the asylum laws because they've become weaponized against us. And the idea that Langford, Murphy, and Sinema came up with was to do just that, to change the asylum laws and to put the infrastructure in place, including the personnel, to be able to handle those asylum claims as quickly as possible, rather than allow them to drag out for 6 years or 2 years or 6 years or whatever the number is at the particular moment. There's a 2-year backlog, so we're throwing people out now who came here, during the Trump years, and the fact that we don't count immigration here by irregular entries like they do in Europe, but we mostly talk about encounters. And people don't seem to understand that encounters represents an event, not a person. If one person tries to enter the country 3 times and they're stopped by Border Patrol, that's 3 encounters, even if it's the same person. So the numbers get astronomical, right? Because the same person's trying to come across the border 3 times, getting counted as an encounter each time. The numbers look a lot worse than they are, which leads somebody who's a low information U.S. senator like Marco Rubio to claim that there are 14 or 16 million undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants in the United States. The number of illegal or undocumented immigrants is pretty much the same, has been steady at somewhere from 10 to 11 million people. And that's because we don't let everybody that we encounter in. And millions of people have been expelled during the last 3 years, but people don't look at that because sometimes they turn around and try to come back in. Sometimes they try to come another way in. But we don't seem to understand the difference between making a legal asylum claim, which is, again, in most of the cases, 98% of the cases, there is no reason to grant them asylum and they have to go back. But it takes a long time. So if you were a desperate person in a country where you can't get ahead and your life is in danger, you'll take 2 to 7 years in another country while you're waiting to be thrown out to earn a fortune in your own country. And that's the calculus that's driving people to our southern border. It's probably also noteworthy that for the first time in a very, very long time, since probably the early 1900s, the majority of migrants are coming from nations other than Mexico and Central America. And we're seeing a mix of Chinese, Russian, Ukrainian, African, Indian coming here claiming asylum. The vast majority of them now are coming from Venezuela because almost 8 million Venezuelans have left their country, and a lot of them are coming here. And, we don't have a relationship with Venezuela. We don't have an airplane to put people on to send them back home. That means that we're relying on Mexico and other countries to take the Venezuelans and fly them back to Venezuela for us. And there's a cost to that. We've been granted that just recently, that Mexico has agreed to send a lot of Venezuelans back to Venezuela. But when they get there, they're going to turn around probably and try again. And it's a very volatile but also unstable situation because, I mean, we know now from the last month that border encounters were down like 55% or something like that from December. So that, in the summer months, fewer people come. In the winter and fall and spring, more people come. The situation is always changing. What we really need to have here more than anything else, I think, is policy and laws that we do not have. We have a Cold War immigration policy in this country that is no longer useful for us, and we need to change that.
That's a very good point. It's sometimes it's our own rules that create the problem that we end up with, and there's no doubt about that. So is the world going to become more isolated? I would have to say, if the far right has its way, it will. Is that a good thing? No, it's not. It's going to be very bad economically. And when we were talking about the climate, the climate crisis, and Europeans becoming less interested in climate change, a lot of it's because of economics. A lot of it is because it hurts economics. And again, everybody always looks at it and says, well, if it's hurt my pocketbook, it must be bad. And they see these changes, these move to renewable energies and things like that as being expensive, taking time to develop, and basically hurting the pocketbook of the people. But I think it would be an interesting thing to look and say, how much traction did the far right movement get because of the pandemic? And it's so easy to blame everything on the pandemic. It really is. But I think it's something that we truly have to look at. And then that might be a study to do. What was the isolation look after the Spanish flu? Mm-hmm. Compare it to, did the far right become more powerful after the Spanish flu? That really devastated the world. And the pandemic, did it change over? So go ahead.
And people didn't want to wear masks during the Spanish flu either. They were very excited and upset about that, and we're being told what to do like we're dogs, and you want us to wear leashes and collars next and all this kind of stuff.
Well, that's people being people. I mean, just stupid.
I mean, there's a couple of reasons to explain why the United States has done better economically than Europe has since the pandemic. But one of them, without a doubt, is immigration. And a big difference between how we're taking in immigrants who are filling jobs that we had open, they're making money and spending money, and that is what's driving our economy. The biggest problem that we have right now is with misinformation and disinformation. And it just seems to me that on the right, they freely just put stuff out there with no proof, and a certain number of people in the population believe what they hear. So, for example, 10 years ago, if I asked you how many illegal immigrants were in the United States, you probably would have said
5 million.
5? Okay. I mean, the number that I kept hearing in throughout my life is that there are like 10 million illegal immigrants.
Sure.
Living in the United States, working, with fake IDs and things like that. In 2019, according to the Pew Research Center, there were 10.2 million illegal immigrants. In 2021, there were 10.5. It's up, but that's not Marco Rubio up.
Oh.
But if you talk to people who are from right-wing think tanks, they'll tell you that it's more like 17 or 18 million people, right? According to the Federation for American Immigration Reform, a group that advocates for reduced immigration. And that's the information that gets out of there, that gets out there, right? Marco Rubio says 14 million, they say 17 million. And that's what people hear, and they freak out about it. It's not as volatile as that. It's, 10.9 million up from 10.3 million, according to the Center for Migration Studies. It's 11 million in 2019 to 11.2 million in 2021, according to the Migration Policy Institute. The numbers seem to be relatively stable because we continue to deport people from here as we, after due process. And it's simply a matter of how can we speed up that due process to get rid of people who are here illegally and continue to encourage legal migration, which has been a great economic boon to the country.
Yeah, and in addition, the individuals who are here are typically doing work like in slaughterhouses and places like that type of work is dangerous. Americans do not want to work on a killing bed floor in a slaughterhouse. And as I read in a peer-reviewed article that, again, I'm very happy to share, and the young man sends money home, and his goal is to put himself through nursing school by working and going to school at the same time. And he would like to remain in the United States, and he wants to be a nurse, and there's certainly a nursing shortage. So he's not attempting to do anything to defraud anyone. He is attempting to better himself, which is what the United States, the dream of America, is supposed to be all about. And I had wanted to, the Angela Merkel, the former German chancellor, had taken in all immigrants over the 10-year period, I believe, when she was chancellor, who had wanted asylum. And the individuals had lived at the expense of the state, and to my knowledge are still living at the expense of the state. And that has turned Germany's public, including youth, very much against immigration. Again, as you said, Scott, we in the United States, we're in a salutary position. We are not Germany. This is why Hitler wanted all that Lebensraum and why he wanted to take over Russia and all these other countries. Germany is not that large. Hitler had a plan to come and take over the United States eventually. We in the United States are enormously fortunate to have the third largest landmass in the entire world after Russia and China, with a very diverse types of climates and quite a lot of arable land and very many skilled workers and industries and so forth. And as Mark said, we can do a lot here. I mean, we're still not self-sufficient, but our immigrants add something like $7 billion to our economy. So we're very fortunate to have immigrants. And rather than slamming the door, we ought to be seeing how immigrants can continue to add to our American dream and our America. And they want to be part of America.
So for Robert from Sydney, why do we think the world politics is shifting to the far right? There's a whole bunch of different, it's a complex thing. There's a bunch of different reasons, and even some reasons that maybe we ought to study a little bit further, such as maybe the impact of the pandemic. Can it be stopped, and will the world become more isolationist? That's going to be hard to tell. That's something that's going to be extremely hard to predict. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.